The late afternoon hung heavy over the brick-lined street. Rows of identical red townhouses stretched into the distance. But today, something was different. Theron Nightvale, a former soldier hardened by years of war, was walking his usual route in uniform. Not out of pride, but because without it, he felt like a ghost. But as he turned the corner onto Hollowbrook Lane, he stopped cold. A single scene shattered the rhythm of his steps. A thin boy trudged forward, struggling under the weight of a bundle of firewood lashed together with rough rope. His small frame shook with effort, and dirt streaked down his tear-stained face. Every movement was a battle. At his side walked a German shepherd, silent and alert, like a shadow bound by loyalty. The dog didn't bark or whimper. He simply stayed close, eyes locked on the boy. Theron felt something stir deep in his chest. This wasn't just hardship. It was something else. He stepped closer carefully. "Hey there, son. You all right?" The boy didn't answer. His eyes stayed down, as if afraid of even being seen. The dog paused, stepping slightly between them but not growling, just watching. "What's his name?" Theron asked, nodding to the dog. After a long moment, the boy murmured, "Mako." The way he said it carried weight, like the name was his anchor. "And yours?" Theron pressed gently. "Griffin," he said softly. "Griffin Vexhart." Theron crouched down, noticing bruises on the boy's wrists, a cut on his ankle, and a weariness no child should ever carry. "Griffin, you're not just carrying firewood, are you?" The boy looked up, and in that brief moment, Theron saw it. The pain, the fear, the silence that only comes from being forced to grow up too soon. He'd seen this look before in the eyes of children in war zones, and it hit him just as hard now. Suddenly, Griffin's legs gave out. The bundle of firewood tumbled to the sidewalk with a loud thud. Theron caught him before he hit the ground. Mako immediately lay beside them, pressing his head against the boy's leg. "He said if I didn't bring it all back, we wouldn't eat again tonight," Griffin whispered, his voice thin, his eyes fluttering. "Who said that?" Theron asked sharply, but Griffin didn't respond. He was already slipping into exhaustion. Theron looked around. Neighbors stood frozen on porches, watching. But he didn't care. He'd carried wounded soldiers out of burning buildings. He knew when something wasn't right. And in that moment, he understood whatever Griffin had come from, it was darker than anything he'd faced in combat. And this was only the beginning. The emergency room smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly above as Theron Nightvale sat in a rigid plastic chair, his elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the swinging door at the end of the hall. Griffin Vexhart had been inside for nearly an hour. Mako lay curled at Theron's feet, unmoving, his ears perked toward every sound that echoed down the sterile corridor. No one had asked too many questions when Theron arrived carrying the unconscious boy. Maybe it was the uniform. Maybe it was the look in his eyes, the same look he'd worn the day he pulled a fellow soldier from a burning convoy. He was used to chaos, but something about this felt heavier, more personal. He didn't even know the boy's last name until a nurse asked for it, and Griffin had whispered it just before blacking out. Vexhart. When the nurse finally emerged, she gave a tired but gentle nod. "He's awake, dehydrated, malnourished, nothing life-threatening, but he hasn't said much." Theron stood, his body tense. "May I see him?" She hesitated. "He asked for you. No one else." That hit Theron harder than he expected. He followed her down the hall, Mako trailing close behind, nails tapping on the linoleum floor. The hospital room was dim, the only light coming from a small wall lamp. Griffin sat up in the bed, wrapped in a too large hospital gown, his eyes hollow but focused. Mako jumped onto the foot of the bed without hesitation, curling against the boy's legs. "Hey!" Theron said softly, not wanting to startle him. Griffin didn't speak, just nodded slowly. Theron sat beside the bed, arms resting on his knees. "You don't have to tell me everything right now, but I need to know. Is someone hurting you?" Griffin stared ahead for a long moment before answering. "He's gone now," he whispered. "Who is?" Theron asked gently. "Tobren," the boy replied, barely louder than a breath. He used to lock me in the shed if I cried. Said I had to be a man. That Mako was the only friend I deserved. Theron's jaw clenched. He recognized the name Tobren Ashmark, a man who'd been in and out of trouble, known in whispers but protected by shadows. Theron looked at the boy and realized this wasn't just about one bad man. This was a pattern, a legacy of silence. And somehow Griffin had ended up alone in the middle of it. As he sat there, the weight of what needed to be done settled in. But before he could speak again, Griffin added something that froze his blood. He said, "If anyone ever came looking for me, I had to run, or someone else would disappear too." Theron couldn't sleep that night. He sat in the corner of his modest living room, elbows on the armrests, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Griffin lay on the pull-out couch, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, his breathing soft and steady. Mako slept at the boy's feet, unmoving, like a sentinel on duty. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but inside, the silence was heavier than the cold. Theron kept replaying the boy's words in his head. "If anyone ever came looking for me, I had to run." There was weight in that sentence, not just fear, but conditioning. Someone had drilled that warning into Griffin's mind, and the name Tobren Ashmark kept echoing like a bell in his skull. Theron had heard it before, years ago. A man with a sealed juvenile record, moved between towns, always followed by missing persons whispers and unexplained bruises. At dawn, Theron made coffee and sat down with a yellow notepad. He began listing names he hadn't spoken in years. One of them stood out, Kanan Hollowbrook, a retired detective who'd once saved Theron's life during a failed hostage rescue in Detroit. If anyone knew how to dig into ghosts like Tobren, it was Kanan. Theron picked up his old flip phone and dialed. After 3 rings, a raspy voice answered. "Nightvale? Hell, I thought you were dead." Theron didn't waste time. "I need your help. It's about a kid. And a name you might remember, Ashmark." While the two spoke, Griffin slowly stirred awake. He sat up, dazed, watching the soldier from across the room. "You were talking about him, weren't you?" Griffin asked, his voice hoarse. Theron walked over, crouching beside the couch. "Yeah, and I'm not gonna lie to you, Griffin. This won't be easy. But you're not alone anymore." Griffin stared at him. "That's what he said before too. The first time someone found us." Theron paused. "What happened to them?" Griffin's eyes dropped. "They went missing the next week. No one even asked questions." That was when it clicked for Theron. This wasn't just abuse. This was control. A system. Someone had covered for Tobren. Possibly more than one person. The stakes had just changed. Mako stood up, ears perked. A second later, someone knocked at the door. 3 slow knocks, then silence. Theron looked at Griffin. The boy had gone pale. "That's him," he whispered. "That's how he knocks." Theron didn't hesitate. He stood, reached behind the cabinet and pulled out his sidearm. Whoever was on the other side of that door wasn't just looking for a runaway boy. They were here to erase something. And Theron wasn't about to let that happen. Theron stood frozen, sidearm in hand, staring at the door as if it might breathe. The 3 knocks echoed still in his bones. Slow, calculated, like someone who wasn't knocking for permission but for control. Griffin clutched the edge of the blanket, eyes wide, chest rising and falling too fast. Mako stood protectively in front of him, tail low, a low growl rumbling from deep inside his chest. Theron motioned with 2 fingers, directing Griffin to move behind the couch. The boy obeyed instantly like a soldier responding to a command, and that, more than anything, told Theron just how conditioned he was. With quiet steps, Theron approached the door, heart steady, every movement methodical. He leaned to the side and peered through the peephole. No one. Just the wind brushing dead leaves across the porch. That was worse than seeing a face. He waited. Nothing. After 30 silent seconds, Theron unlocked the door and opened it slowly, weapon still at his side. The porch was empty, but something was off. On the doormat lay a piece of folded paper, weighed down by a single stone. Theron grabbed it with a gloved hand, unfolded it, and read the 5 words scrawled in thick ink. He belongs to Blackmaw now, a name he hadn't heard in over a decade. Fenris Blackmaw. Ex-military. Dishonorably discharged. Tied to off-the-record operations. And known for one thing, making people disappear. Theron locked the door again, double-checking the windows. Griffin sat up slowly, his voice barely audible. Is it a warning? Theron nodded. It's more than that. It's a message. Someone's staking a claim. Griffin looked down at Mako, who now lay still, his eyes locked on the front door. Blackmaw, he used to come around. He and Tobren. They laughed when people cried. That single sentence hit Theron harder than any explosion he'd faced overseas. He knew this wasn't just some twisted custody game, this was trafficking. Psychological warfare. Something organized and buried so deep that no one dared speak of it. And now it had found its way to his doorstep. Theron pulled out his phone and texted Kanan. We have a name. Blackmaw. It's worse than we thought. The reply came almost instantly. I'm on my way. As the sun began to rise behind the dark clouds outside, the room felt colder than ever. Theron sat beside Griffin again, the boy's face pale, his trust fragile. But something had shifted. Now it wasn't just about protection, it was about war. And Theron Nightvale had never walked away from a fight. By the time Kanan Hollowbrook arrived, the air had shifted. The streets outside were still quiet, but inside Theron's home, the tension was thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. Kanan walked in with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who had seen too much. His silver hair was tied back, and a long scar cut across his left cheek, a reminder of a case that nearly ended him. He took one look at Griffin, then at Theron and spoke low. Tell me everything. From the beginning. Theron handed him the note left on the porch. Kanan read it without flinching, but Theron saw the flash of recognition in his eyes. Blackmaw's not a ghost, he muttered. Not anymore. Griffin sat nearby, clutching Mako's fur with both hands. The dog hadn't moved from his side. Kanan crouched down to the boy's level. Griffin, has Fenris Blackmaw ever touched you? Hurt you? The boy shook his head slowly. He didn't need to. Tobren did all of that. Fenris just watched. That word, watched, left a hollow ring in the air. Theron paced the room. So he was the mind behind it. Kanan nodded. That's what he does. He doesn't get his hands dirty. He makes monsters and hides behind them. He turned to Theron. But if he left a note, that means he's slipping. That was arrogance. Maybe fear. Griffin looked up. He's not afraid. He always said no one would ever believe a kid like me. Kanan's expression darkened. Then we give them no choice. He pulled out a battered leather folder and spread photos across the table. Missing children, old case files, scribbled maps. I've been tracking disappearances across 5 counties. Patterns. Codes. Griffin just confirmed the link I needed. Ashmark, Blackmaw, and a property upstate. Abandoned mill near Dreadmore Ridge. I believe that's where they kept the others. Theron's jaw clenched. How far? 2 hours by car, Kanan replied. But we can't go in blind. Theron looked toward the window, the morning light now beginning to break through the clouds. We don't wait. If we stall, they'll move again. And next time, Griffin won't be the only name on that list. The weight of that sentence settled hard. Griffin stood up slowly. You're going there? Theron met his eyes. We are. Kanan raised an eyebrow. You're bringing the boy? I'm not leaving him behind, Theron answered, voice like steel. He knows more than we do. And this time we're not walking into the dark. We're bringing the fire with us. The road to Dreadmore Ridge was long, narrow, and lined with skeletal trees that clawed at the sky like dead hands. The further they drove, the more the world seemed to fade behind them. No gas stations, no houses, no cell signal. Just fog, frost, and silence. Theron sat behind the wheel, eyes locked ahead. Kanan was in the passenger seat, flipping through a worn notebook filled with hand-drawn maps and cryptic notes. In the back, Griffin sat with Mako curled beside him, the boy's hands never leaving the dog's fur. "We're close," Kanan muttered. "About 2 miles off the main road. They used to call it the Black Mill. Shut down in '92 after a fire. Perfect place to vanish people." Theron didn't respond. His jaw was clenched so tight it ached. Every instinct in his body screamed that this was a trap, and yet they had no choice. Black Maw had to be found, not just for Griffin, but for every name in Kanan's folder. As the car crept off the paved road onto a gravel path, the trees thickened. A rusted gate appeared in the distance, chained but not locked. Mako perked up, ears twitching. "He knows this place?" Griffin whispered, eyes wide. "We came here once. Just once. Tobren said it was where kids went when they stopped being useful." Theron's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Not today," he muttered. "Today we end this." They passed through the gate, the gravel crunching beneath the tires like bones. The building emerged through the fog. A collapsed structure of blackened wood, broken windows, and silence too loud to ignore. They parked behind a line of overgrown shrubs. No visible movement, no sound, just the quiet hum of evil buried beneath the surface. Theron turned to Griffin. "Stay close. You don't speak unless I say so." "Understood." Griffin nodded, his eyes never leaving the mill. They moved as a unit, Theron first, then Griffin and Mako, with Kanan sweeping behind. Inside, the mill was a labyrinth of charred beams and echoing footsteps. The air smelled of rot and ash. Griffin stopped suddenly. "That door," he whispered, pointing to a heavy metal hatch bolted into the floor. "That's where they kept them. Locked up, sometimes for days." Kanan knelt down and examined the lock. "Recently used. Scratches are fresh." Theron raised his weapon. "We're not alone." At that moment, a sound broke through the stillness. A distant, dragging noise, metallic and slow, like a chain being pulled across concrete. Mako stood alert, growling low. Griffin grabbed Theron's jacket, his voice shaking. "He's here. I can feel it." Theron didn't doubt him, because something about this place wasn't just abandoned, it was alive. And whatever waited beneath that hatch wasn't done yet. The metal hatch let out a moaning creak as Kanan forced it open, revealing a narrow staircase that spiraled downward into darkness. The smell that rose from below was sharp, a mixture of rust, mold, and something older, something rotten. Theron turned to Griffin, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "You stay here. No arguments." Griffin hesitated, then nodded. Mako, however, didn't move from the boy's side. Kanan led the way with a flashlight clipped to his vest, and Theron followed close behind, sidearm drawn. The staircase was steep, the concrete walls dripping with condensation. As they descended, faint sounds began to surface, humming wires, low buzzing, and then voices, muffled, whispering, but not speaking to each other, more like repeating something, over and over. "You hear that?" Theron asked. Kanan nodded grimly. "They've been conditioned, trained. This wasn't just abuse. It was programming." At the base of the stairs, they entered a long corridor lit by flickering overhead bulbs. Doors lined both sides, some bolted shut, others slightly ajar. On the walls, symbols had been spray-painted in red crude X's, tally marks, and numbers. "Room assignments," Kanan muttered. "Records of who went where." They approached one partially open door. Theron pushed it slowly. Inside, the room was small and windowless, with a metal cot and chains bolted into the floor. But it wasn't empty. A boy, no older than 10, sat against the far wall, eyes wide and vacant. He didn't react to the light or the sound of the door. His lips moved silently, repeating something that neither Theron nor Kanan could quite hear. "Don't move," Kanan whispered. "They might panic." Theron stepped forward slowly, crouching down. "Hey kid, you're safe now. We're here to get you out." The boy didn't blink. He just kept whispering. Theron leaned in and finally heard it. "Black Maw watches. Black Maw remembers. Black Maw never forgets." A cold chill ran down Theron's spine. This wasn't just fear, it was indoctrination. a cult of control shaped by terror. He turned to Kanan. We need to clear the rest of the rooms. There could be more. But just as they stepped back into the hallway, a sharp metal clang echoed from above. The hatch had slammed shut. Locked. At the top of the stairs, Griffin screamed. He's here. He locked it. Mako's bark followed, loud, aggressive, defiant. Theron rushed to the bottom of the staircase, fists pounding against the metal. Griffin, answer me. Only silence replied, and that silence was worse than any scream. Theron pounded the hatch until his knuckles bled. The sound of Mako's barking faded, then stopped altogether. Above, silence returned, thick and final. Griffin, he shouted again. Nothing. Kanan stepped beside him, breath steady but grim. They separated us. Classic Black Maw move. Isolate and dismantle. Theron cursed under his breath. I should have never left him up there. Not for a second. In the basement corridor, the air felt tighter, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The boy from the cell still murmured his chant, eyes empty, body unmoving. Kanan turned to him, voice low but firm. Do you know the way out? The boy blinked once, then slowly lifted a trembling hand, pointing down the hall. No words, just that small gesture. Theron nodded. Let's move. We'll come back for the others once we find Griffin. They moved quickly, passing room after room. Some empty, others with broken chains or torn restraints. Behind one door, they heard shallow breathing but didn't stop. Every second mattered now. As they reached the end of the hall, a steel door loomed ahead. Red lights blinked above it, and carved crudely into the surface were the words, The Hollow Room. Kanan swallowed hard. I've seen this name in files. This is where they broke them. Theron didn't hesitate. He kicked the door open. Inside was a large circular chamber, stone walls, no windows. In the center stood Fenris Blackmaw. His hair was longer now, streaked with gray, but his eyes, they were the same cold, calculating eyes from the military records. Beside him, hands tied, stood Griffin. His lip bleeding, but defiant. Mako was there too, growling low, a gash across his shoulder. Fenris smiled. Didn't expect you, Nightvale, but I'm glad you came. Now the boy can watch you die. Theron raised his weapon. Let him go. Fenris didn't flinch. You think this is about one boy? This is about order, discipline. You saw what happens to the forgotten. I give them purpose. Griffin's voice cracked as he shouted, You gave us chains. Fenris turned to strike him, but Mako lunged, teeth sinking into the man's arm. Chaos erupted. Theron fired, the shot ripping through the room. Kanan rushed forward. Mako held on as Fenris screamed, stumbling backward. Griffin kicked out with both feet, knocking over a table filled with tools. Sparks burst as lights overhead shattered. And just like that, the room went dark. In the darkness, Theron heard Fenris laughing. Not loud, but low and unhinged. This isn't over, he whispered. The darkness inside the hollow room was complete. No flickering lights, no shadows, just black silence broken only by heavy breathing and the sound of dripping water. Theron crouched low, heart pounding, weapon drawn. Somewhere in the dark, Fenris Blackmaw was still alive, and moving. Griffin had rolled beneath a table, clutching Mako, whispering to keep the wounded dog calm. Blood pooled slowly under them, though Griffin wasn't sure if it was his or Mako's. Kanan pulled a flare from his coat, struck it against the wall. A burst of red light flooded the room, painting everything in violent crimson. In that moment, they saw him, Fenris, hunched behind a pillar, blood dripping from his bitten arm, eyes blazing with something beyond hatred. You ruined everything, he hissed. You don't know what this place meant. Theron stepped forward. I know exactly what it meant, and I'm going to burn it out of existence. Fenris charged, swinging a rusted crowbar. Theron blocked it with his forearm, the force of it knocking him to one knee. Kanan fired once. The bullet hit Fenris in the shoulder, sending him stumbling back with a snarl. You think this ends with me? Fenris spat, coughing blood. There are others. Dozens. I was just the beginning. He pressed a switch on the wall behind him. A deep rumble echoed below the floor. What did you do? Kanan shouted. The ground vibrated beneath their feet. A low whine began to rise, a gas line or maybe a charge. He rigged the place, Theron realized. He'd rather bury it all than face what's coming. Griffin crawled from under the table. We have to get out. Now. Theron grabbed the boy with one arm, Mako under the other, and shouted, Go! Back up the stairs. The hallway above shook violently as they ran. Pipes burst, steam pouring through cracks in the walls. Smoke followed them, thick and acrid. As they neared the top, the hatch burst open. Someone had broken it from the outside. A figure reached down. Laziel Ironmore, Kanan's old contact from the bureau, his badge visible in the red light. Let's go! He shouted, helping Griffin and Mako up first, then Theron, then Kanan. Behind them, the mill groaned like a dying animal. The stairs buckled. Fenris's scream echoed one last time through the chamber below. Angry, wounded, and final. They collapsed outside as the first explosion ripped through the structure. Flames burst from beneath the earth, consuming everything. Everything except the ones who escaped it. 3 weeks later, the scars still ached, the visible ones and the ones no one could see. The Dreadmore fire made headlines across the state. Abandoned mill turns into hellfire. Possible trafficking ring under investigation. But the articles never mentioned Fenris Blackmaw, not by name. Too much was buried. Too many people wanted it that way. Theron Nightvale watched from the porch of a small farmhouse outside Hollowbrook. It was quiet out there, the kind of quiet he used to hate. Now it felt necessary. Inside, Griffin Vexhart was doing his homework at the kitchen table, his handwriting shaky but determined. Mako lay nearby, bandaged and healing, one ear twitching with every sound. Griffin still didn't talk much about the past, but he no longer flinched when the floor creaked. That was something. Kanan Hollowbrook had returned to the city. Before he left, he gave Theron a single warning. You took down one piece. The rest won't fall so easy. Theron knew that. But he also knew this: one boy was safe now. One boy had a chance to be more than what the world tried to make him. And that was worth every bruise, every nightmare, every drop of blood. That evening, Griffin stepped outside, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He handed one to Theron without saying a word and sat on the step beside him. The stars were just beginning to show. After a long silence, Griffin spoke. Do you think he's really gone? Theron looked ahead, the horizon barely lit by the dying sun. He's gone, he said. But what he left behind might take longer to clean up. Griffin nodded slowly, then added, I want to help people. Someday. The way you helped me. The words hit Theron harder than he expected. Not because of what they meant, but because of how far the boy had come to say them. He placed a hand gently on Griffin's shoulder. You already have, he said. Inside the house, Mako barked once. Just a soft, happy sound, then settled again. The quiet returned. Real quiet this time. And as Theron sat beside a boy who had every reason to be broken but chose to rebuild, he realized something important. Sometimes you don't need a battlefield to be a soldier. Sometimes you just need someone worth fighting for.